So I'm going to be talking about work that I've been helping lead in Jamaica since 2018, in protecting Jamaica's most endangered bats. But before I do that, I just wanted to, give a little bit of background about myself and also just how we got to this stage working in Jamaica. So as Linda mentions, I'm the director of our Endangered Species Interventions Program. So one thing that I'm responsible for is helping direct BCI's work internationally, trying to protect the rare and the most endangered bats around the world. But this is very much a collaborative effort. And if anyone's seen our strategic plan, we've broken ourselves into 4 different missions. So mission 1 is predominantly what I'm working on, but all the work that I'm going to be talking about is very much supported by the rest of the organization as a whole. So I just wanted to kind of give out a shout out to the whole organization on this, because both within everyone at BCI and all the partners involved with this project, this work would not be possible. But just to put this in context, I mean, the threat to all wildlife is real, and we've been doing a lot of work on recognizing the threats to bats. And I was part of a paper we did recently looking at the major threats and the challenges of conservation. And between habitat modification, climate change, disturbance, whether intentional or not, bats as well as all wildlife are being threatened. And you can see from the maps on the right-hand side that the high density of threatened bat species are normally around the tropics. This is predominantly just because this is where the higher number of species diversity are. Similarly, for data deficient species, you can really see South America is a little bit of a hotspot on this, as well as the rest of the tropics as well. But this doesn't take into account the most endangered species of bats, and we'll get onto that in a sec. But just in a global context, the IUCN has assessed about 1,300 species of bats right now for their conservation status. And if we look at the number of threatened bats, that's vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered, that's 15% of all bats that have currently been assessed, which is about 180 species. We have 67% of species that are near threatened or least concerned. And then we have 18% of species, 18% of all the species assessed, so 227 species that are data deficient. And this means we just purely do not know enough about them to even give them a classification status on their rarity and conservation importance. Which means really all those 227 bats need to be studied. So just on this, we have 407 bat species. So a third of all bats that have been assessed are in need of real conservation attention. But there's more. If we focus on the 67% of bats that aren't classified as threatened yet, and we look at their population trends, 128 species that class as non-threatened have decline in population trends. And 453 species of non-threatened have unknown population trends. So they could all be going down as far as we know. So if you combine this with threatened species, we've got 988 bats, so about 80% of all ones that have been assessed so far, in real need of conservation attention. I promise this is going to get brighter, and it isn't all gloom and doom. So one thing that we really have to do is prioritize where we're working. And we use this vulnerability, feasibility, and impacts prioritization rubric following the conservation of open standards framework to really assess where we as an organization can make the biggest impact, where we can come in, support project partners, build the capacity with local partners, the local community members, to really make the difference and make long, sustainable changes to anything we address. And from this is our current portfolio within the projects in which the endangered species team are working on. So we've currently got active projects in Fiji, Comoros, Rwanda, Guinea, Jamaica, Mexico, and the US. So as the title of this talk suggested, I'm just really going to focus on the Jamaica project right now. But I wanted to show this because all the work we're doing in Jamaica helps shape the conservation opportunities and the conservation work in other areas, and vice versa. A lot of the work we're doing in Jamaica has really been guided by work with, we're kind of wrapping up in Fiji, which is protecting the last known cave roost for the Fijian free-tailed bat. So these are all interlinked, and we're still very much in the learning phase. And if anyone else, if you have any questions about any of the work we do that I don't cover as part of this, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. So let's just focus on Jamaica now. Jamaica is just a phenomenal country. It is this biodiversity hotspot, an important contributor to the whole biodiversity of the Caribbean basin. Bats make up a significant chunk of this biodiversity as well. So Jamaica currently has 21 species of bats representing 6 different families. 5 of these are endemic to Jamaica, and 8 of these are restricted to the Caribbean as a whole. And importantly, for us anyway, 10 species are obligate cave dwellers. And this map on the bottom right, all these red dots are individual caves that have been identified and assessed. And a little bit of a Bible for anyone working in Jamaica, if this works with the scarce. There's a Jamaica Underground book, which you can get off Amazon. If anyone's interested in learning more about caves in Jamaica, this is a phenomenal resource, which yeah, I always have in hands sort of reach, because it's a wealth of information. So we have this advantage that we know where the caves are. There's been a lot of bat research and monitoring done in Jamaica since at least the 1960s. So as a result, we also know which caves are no longer being occupied by bats. And over the last 40 to 60 years, there has been a noticeable decrease in the number of caves being used by bats, and subsequently the number of individuals of a species are decreasing as well. Threats are multiple. You have the larger threats of mining, mineral extraction, road construction, all altering the landscape in a way that's just too quick for animals to adapt. You also have agroforestry, urban development, urban sprawl, and just unsustainable agricultural practices as well. And this is not just Jamaica, this is a global threat. All of these things I'm going to talk about now are threats that we're dealing with throughout the world. And then you have other things such as predation by feral animals. So to the top left, you can see a feral cat that's predating on a bat. You have mongoose. You have guano harvesters who are inadvertently disturbing the bats as they're going in. And especially since COVID times, the price of artificial fertilizer has gone up, and there's been an increased demand on organic forms of fertilizer such as bat guano. And these are all things that disturbance I usually find is not intentional, it's just an unintentional consequence of activities going on. So that's one thing we always try and address in what can we do to provide additional information to help behavioural change in the areas we're working. And Jamaica does have 2 critically endangered bats. So there's the Jamaican flower bat, which is Phalanthus aphyla, and the Jamaican funnel-eared bat, which is Natalis jumacensis. Now, I always want to point out the photo for Natalis jumacensis isn't Natalis jumacensis. A living individual has never been observed. So this species is only known through fossil evidence and remains found in caves. Hopefully, my dream is that we're going to change this and actually have a photo of this species, but as yet, the population is very small and they're in a cave with a lot of other bats, so it's a little bit of a needle in a haystack type of effort. But both of them are now confined currently to individual single caves, and this makes them extremely vulnerable to extinction. So one thing that we've been doing is really thinking about how we can protect these caves and working with in-country partners to do that. And I just wanted to show this video just because, well, I like it, but it shows the Jamaican flower bat flying off and emerging from its cave. And this is a really interesting bat. It flies extremely slowly, and you can see just from the belly It's got this really bright white belly that shows up on film extremely well. And they almost sort of drag their feet in the air when they fly along. But I've got more videos of them to show you as well. But this is Stony Hill Cave. Currently, it's the last known maternity roost for this species. Now, this bat is an interesting and checkered history that for over 20 years, it was thought extinct because the known cave roosts where this bat was observed occurring had all, they're just gone, partly through cave disturbance, a lot of guano extraction, unfortunately altered the microclimates of these caves. And these bats need hot caves. They're called hot caves. There's cave sections where these bats occupy are constantly above 80, 85 degrees Fahrenheit, always above about between 70 and 80 degrees, 70, 80% humidity. So these are hot, humid conditions where these bats have to gather. If they're in cooler parts of the cave, they just won't survive, they won't breed, and then you have this population collapse. So protecting these hot caves, and this is a big thing in the Caribbean, hot caves are a rare commodity, and anything we can do to protect them, we really are leaning in and trying to help out. So this bat was thought to be extinct for about 20 years until the National Environment and Planning Agency in Jamaica, so NEPA in short, rediscovered it. It was around 2010 in Stony Hill Cave. So currently this is the last known maternity roost for this cave, which is alarming. If anything happened to this, we could go into another period of thinking they're extinct. And in 2018, the Jamaican authorities reached out to us because there was a growing and significant risk to Stony Hill Cave by development. It's in an area where it's an area where there are houses, but there's increasing sort of interest in developing sites in this area. And NEPA were again increasingly concerned that the land around the cave would be developed and the habitat modification would be destructive for the bats. Especially as I mentioned before, hot caves are vulnerable in their own right. You knock in and create any additional entrance to these caves and create airflow through it, the temperature and humidity just crash. These bats won't survive, and then they're gone forever. So we get very nervous when bat species are confined to just one hot cave, because hot caves in their own right are vulnerable, and if they're only in one hot cave, it makes them even more susceptible to extinction. So we started working with NEPA on this, and we sent a team, including myself, down to Jamaica. We assessed the cave. We spoke with the Jamaican authorities to really feel how BCI can make a contribution to this. And realistically, due to the threat of development and wanting to make sure that while the site currently wasn't being developed, we wanted to make sure that if the Jamaican government owned the site and had it protected for conservation, no matter when it is, this site has long-term protection from any encroachment from development. So any of our members who cast their minds back to 2018, we were talking about this project then, obviously we're at the very start, in just the importance of the project and why it was imperative that we started it when we did.
John, quick question. We had a quick question in the chat Q&A. What is the definition of a hot cave? Is there a specific criteria for what makes a cave a hot cave? Or
yeah, it's these really hot and humid conditions. So the minimum is about 80 degrees Fahrenheit with 70% humidity. And hot caves are really interesting that sometimes they've been created naturally, other times that the bats are actually the creators of their own environment. You may have got a different population moving in, they produce the guano and just the sheer body numbers that starts to increase the temperature of the cave. The guano then starts to decompose, that generates more heat. The pee the bats are letting out creates the humidity, and then you create this amazing cycle where the bats are keeping their own conditions alive. But this is why they're very delicate ecosystems as well. If that's the case, and the bats go for any particular reason, or you move the guano, or the airflow changes this unique environment that's been created, it can just all be lost in the blink of an eye. And we have had cases of that inadvertently, either through construction, earthquakes, like you name it. That there was a case I was involved with a few years ago where unfortunately there was a tropical cyclone that doesn't normally hit an area. It created a lot of water that rushed into the cave that actually flushed out all the guano, and it completely changed the microclimatic conditions. So that's why these are really vulnerable and really fragile sites that just need to be protected, especially with a lot of clear felling. If you remove the trees, then it can really alter water flow as well, and water runoff can be a significant threat in those cases. So as part of the work that we were doing with Stony Hill, though, we brought in our sub-training team, and they are extremely skilled at creating these three-dimensional maps. And these are exceptionally valuable when you want to plot how deep under the ground the caves are. And you can see on the left, this is my colleague, Jason Corbett. So he's doing a topside survey with the LiDAR, and that machine that's spinning around is shooting off millions of laser pulses per minute. And then it kind of works a bit like back echolocation. As the lasers bounce back, it creates this three-dimensional image of what's going on around us. And you can see here, this is the three-dimensional image of Stony Hill Cave and the land on top. And you can see this is a single entrance cave. It goes down, it has two different chambers. And I don't know this for a fact, but just from experience, I think one of the things that makes this cave so unique is it has a real significant choke point just in the middle there. And this stops airflow. And I think because of that, in the main part of the cave, you've got these really hot and humid conditions. But you'll see there's no other entrance exit point to the cave. This LiDAR scan is incredibly important. You see it here. There's actually a road that runs along this site. And for anyone who's been in a cave, especially a hot, humid cave that has thousands of bats flying around in your face, it's very easy to get disorientated. And when we first came to this site, the general impression was that this cave started here and went back up into the hill. But what the LiDAR scan actually showed us, because when you go down into this little narrow corridor, it actually kicks back out, and you can see a considerable part of the cave actually goes underneath this main road. So one of the first things we did was work with NEPA and work with the Highways Agency just to make sure if any road work is done in this area, we have exactly mapped out how deep under the ground this cave runs to make sure they don't get anywhere near from breaking into it, because that would be just game over for this hot cave and the bats using it. The other things we wanted to do, as well as obviously the threat of development, what are the other threats to the bats at this cave? We know just from the literature that feral cats are a problem, not just in Jamaica, across a lot of areas of the globe. So we just wanted to make sure what else could impact the bats of this cave. There's no point protecting it from development if another thing is just coming in and causing an equal amount of disturbance. So we deployed camera traps at the sites that we're working at, and lo and behold, you can see a picture on the right. We call it Bad Kitty. This bat has got a critically endangered Phyllonyctris in its mouth right there. And here in the video, you can see just how good the cats are at catching the bats. And that's got a bat in its mouth. And unfortunately, from 28 days worth of monitoring, I recorded 87 bats that had been taken by cats. Now, this isn't throughout the whole year. We've done monitoring throughout the whole year, and the peak is in May, where the juveniles are just started. The pups have been born, and they're just becoming juveniles and starting to fly, and they're just slower, they're less agile, and they're just making easier targets for the cats. So the cats are really just taking advantage of these juveniles flying around, and then they're still taking adults throughout the rest of the year, but it's in much lower numbers. So we really have got this sensitive time where the cats are making this big impression. But when we were speaking to the Jamaican authorities, cat predation at this cave, at least, had never thought to be an issue. And to be honest, when I first went to the cave and I inspected, I didn't see any remains of bats. I didn't see any of the typical evidence that shows there's heavy cat predation. And I was actually there in May as well and saw all nothing. But the camera traps helps us sort of put the final, solve the last piece of the puzzle, and it was mongoose. And they were going around in the very early hours and essentially hoovering up any bat remains that were left on the ground from the cats. And as a result, there was just no evidence on the ground whatsoever. So it really showed the importance of carrying out the camera traps, because without this, we would never have known that cat predation was such a big issue at this cave. But thanks a lot to all our members. So I'm very appreciative of this. We had an incredibly generous fundraising appeal, and as a result of that, we could help the Jamaican authorities purchase Stony Hill Cave. We immediately transferred it to their holdings, which they now hold in perpetuity and is under conservation easement. So nothing can happen to this site apart from conservation measures right now. So this was a huge win for us in just making sure that in the long term, there was no immediate threat to this site, and we can be sure that there was no encroachment, especially on the trees around the immediate cave vicinity. I want to quickly pivot now to Sinclair Cave, though, because this is the other cave that we were really interested in, and the Jamaican flower bat was also known to occur in this. We haven't recorded it in there for years, but it is the last known site for the Jamaican funnel-eared bat as well. Sinclair Cave is what I would call a mega-roost. It has over 2 million bats estimated using it, of at least 10 different species. It is a phenomenal complex. And if you go through it, which, well, I say this, even we try and limit how often we go into these sites, I should point out, because we want to minimize the disruption to the bats. More often than not now, if we do have to visit a cave, we're using red light and infrared technology to make sure we minimize the disturbance, because a lot of these bats are extremely vulnerable and susceptible to disturbance through white light. But for the aim of this survey, and this is why Angelo's in his waders with a hand net, we wanted to try and get a subsample of the different species used in the cave so we could really start to plot what bats were where. But as you can see, part of this cave is just nasty. Again, sections are another hot cave, and what Angelo is actually walking through here, this is a biofilm of insects that are just devouring the guano that's falling onto the water and decomposing. So this, if you shine your light on this pool, it just moves and it shimmers through all the insect life that's actually feeding on the bat, well, even bat remains as they die and fall down. But again, the bat guano is incredibly important, keeping this unique ecosystem alive. And when you have at least 2 million bats emerging from a cave, it's a pretty impressive sight. So this is more recent work we've been doing everything under infrared video. And you can just see here, and this will last for over an hour, bats just streaming out of this site and then fill in this first antechamber before it gets dark enough outside, and then they'll start going through. And there are pinch points in this cave as well. You can see from this camera trap that we installed on one of the closer bits, more narrow parts of the cave, there's just not enough blind space for the bats. So actually some of them are landing on this rock and then crawling over until it gets a little bit wider and then taking off again. So it's a phenomenal cave and just with a number of bats. And this is what it looks like with the bats all emerging from the entrance. And this will last hours into the evening. So development is not a threat at this site, thankfully. But again, what is predation by feral cats. And we did a few plots, and within 1 hour, I collected 20 pairs of wings. So just from one, I think we had a meter by meter plot, 20 bats had been killed with the wings just discarded by the cats. So we collected these wings, and then we set up a mobile genetics lab in our hotel room, which the hotel was not overly happy with. But it didn't mean that we could get this result, that we could get this data very quickly. So we did the DNA extractions, we ran the PCRs, and we amplified the DNA. And we found from the wings that we collected, and there was more than 20 by the end of this, that Monophilus and Mormoops were the two most common bats that were being captured by the cats. This isn't surprising. Mormoops is one of the more abundant bats in this cave. So I think it's just law of probability. If you stick your hand up, nine times out of 10, you're going to get Mormoops in the first hour. Monophilus is not surprising either. This is a bit like the Jamaican flower bat. It has broad wings. It flies pretty slowly. It makes an easier target for the cats as the bats fly past. So how do we resolve this in a sort of sustainable way? Well, we've teamed up with Pacific Rim Conservation, which is a conservation organization based out of Hawaii, who are amazingly experienced in dealing with predation of, in this case, bird eggs by cats, rats, any other invasive or feral animal. And they have a lot of experience in designing these predator-proof fences. And these fences will go up, and you can see on one side they have this hood that stops any cats jumping in. But it means if you trap any cats inside the system, they can easily jump out. And they have video footage of cats jumping out of these things, but not being able to jump back in. And realistically, no one can be there trying to catch cats the whole time, but this is a very good system that we can just install and have protecting the bats, excuse me, using this cave system. And this is an example of a predator-proof fence they've installed in Hawaii. And as we speak, we're working with a Jamaican contractor called Everything Fencing, and they are currently working on building this fence for us, which I'm actually traveling to Jamaica in a couple of weeks' time to carry on our work over there. So I'll be able to see how that's going and get footage of it as well. But we're very excited. Cats have been known to be a problem at this site for over 30 years. So for me, this is a really incredible achievement that we've been able to do and just stop this continual problem for the bats as they emerge every night to try and survive and get in the food that they need. But in longer terms, we're really trying to think about how we can help partners in Jamaica do long-term monitoring, assess for any new threats, just assess whether or not the threats that we're trying to reduce are being reduced or whether they're going to come back, but all minimize the disturbance to bats. Like I said, I very rarely try and enter caves nowadays or even catch bats because it's very disruptive to them. We only really do it when we have to. And with technology now as it is, it's just going leaps and bounds in what we can achieve without disturbing any individual whatsoever. So infrared technology is extremely good, which you can see on the left, us setting up, compared to us trudging through miles and miles of bat-infested water going through some of these caves. And this makes it easier for partners as well. No one really wants to be doing what Angelo's having to do on the right-hand side, whereas on the left-hand side is easier, quicker, and you get just as good results. And also just working with the local community. As I mentioned before, guano harvesting does occur across many, many countries. And it's trying to figure out how we can work with communities to either come up with guidelines in when you can extract guano, how much you can extract, or if you're in really sensitive caves, just trying to find ways around just not visiting that site. In the tropics, when you get bats occupying caves all year round, it makes life very tricky. We're working on a project in Vietnam at the moment where the bats are just there seasonally. A few million bats coming in the summer, leave in the autumn, and then you can just go and collect all the guano because it's not a hot cave. The bats do not care if the guano's there or not. But you can go and collect the guano, then the same numbers of bats will come back every year because they're not being disturbed. Jamaica is different because the bats tend to be there all year round. So it's trying to really figure out alternative ways of guano extraction. And realistically, one of the easiest things to do is just not extract guano from caves. There are many insectivorous bats, which is the guano that you actually need for fertilizer, fruit bats, nectivore bats, which the Jamaican flower bat is. Guano is not effective as a fertilizer because it doesn't have the phosphates in that you get from the insects for the fertilizer. So we're actually currently working with NEPA right now. In this picture is not from Jamaica. This is just an example of what we want to install in Jamaica. This way we can kind of have community guano houses, and this way the bats can come in, poop as much as they like, and then these doors can be opened, extract the guano, which also means people don't have to go into these hot, humid caves to extract the guano. So it's a much better way for people, healthier as well. Again, caves aren't the healthiest of places to go into. And also it's better for the bats as well, because this can be extracted at nighttime without the bats really even knowing what you're doing. And just community outreach. We've designed a number of stickers that we just give out, especially to kids who are interested in what we're doing. We never want to stop people from knowing what we're doing. And we really want to highlight why we're doing it and why people see us being reluctant going into these cave sites as well. And so we've got stickers, we give talks, and we provide further information as part of STEM programs in Jamaica. So we're really trying to make sure this is a community-based, community-led initiative by the time we leave any of these project sites. And I'm really happy to say that, especially the community at the Polyground, which the Polyground community, which is near Sinclair Cave, have been extremely generous with their time and just helping us with all of this work. So I'm really appreciative of all the community members we're working with on this project. So I mentioned before, ongoing work includes the feral cat exclusion with the one-way fencing. This is kind of a prototype we were putting out to make sure the bats weren't impacted by the fence going up, which thankfully they weren't. And like I said, that the fence is going up as we speak, so I'll be able to see that in a couple of weeks' time. As I mentioned before, infrared monitoring has become an incredibly valuable tool with this, and being able to go into a cave just with some red lights, filming the bats acting normally is really valuable to us, because it helps us. If you go in with white light, bats just take off. They start flying around and you can't get accurate counts. I've been in with infrared night vision goggles. I walked into the cave and I pretty much walked right up to a bat by the side of my face, and it didn't even really care that I was there. So it's a really good way of doing this in a way that doesn't disturb the bats. And again, this is all infrared. This is no white light. It's just we had a lot of infrared light, which makes it shine very brightly. It allows us to sort of capture all these natural history observations that we wouldn't be able to do any other way. Because the Jamaican flower bat is extremely light sensitive. If you just stick your head lamp on outside, they just won't come out, or they'll come out reluctantly after a while. But they really need complete darkness. So tree cover around this site is hugely important. And one of the things we're trying to do right now is actually extend the footprint of ownership that we have around this site to make sure that we protect as large a forest fragment as possible to really do long-term protection for this species. When we first went into this project, the priority was just the cave mouth. But the more we research and the more we study the bats, the more we realize how sensitive they are to light, the more we realize how this wider footprint and the trees that are on it are really essential for them. And again, this is critically endangered Phylloxera. We're just getting amazing footage and just seeing how they're playing, how they're grooming each other, just how there's one individual just hanging by one leg and resting here, which seems to be a fairly common occurrence from filming that we've done. It's just remarkable just watching these bats just behaving normally. And then we're looking at other techniques as well. Like I said, I'm always trying to figure out how to do stuff with the minimum amount of disturbance, but to achieve the greatest impact. And environmental DNA, so eDNA to detect rare species, is something I've been really championing in the last few years. We've been working on this in Guinea, now in Jamaica, and you can get eDNA anywhere. We started from water first with nature metrics, just sampling water courses, and bats shed DNA like everyone else. So if bats go into water to drink, if they peat or poop over water and that goes into the water, fragments of their DNA are in there. And so what we're doing is we're sampling water courses where bats will probably go in to drink and just starting to plot where these bats are. And a new method we're currently trialing is using air eDNA, where we're getting air samples from caves, and we're working with the partners both in the UK, in Canada, the US, and in Jamaica, where we'll send people into different caves. They'll have the air sampling unit on them. It's just going to sample air as they walk through, or if they stick up a static sampling station, and then we can sample that air that's on anything on the air that's been caught on the filter, and just see what bats we've got there. I just wanted to round this off by saying thank you to everyone involved. This is really just a small subset of people that have been part of this project, but I think it kind of gives an impression of how many people have been involved in this, both in Jamaica, from BCI, and all our global partners as well. And I should say our members as well. We can't do this without you. I'm really grateful for all the support and interest we have in this work, and it really helps us push forward as well. So thank you very much. Now, this isn't a bat from Jamaica, but I always love this. This is Centurio senex, and yeah, it's fun. So I hope I haven't bored everyone and you're not asleep like me on the right-hand side, but I am here now to answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we do have a bunch of questions that I think are going to be very exciting to answer. So starting back from the beginning, how much land around the cave was BCI able to purchase?
We were able to purchase it. They're very small land parcels. Jamaica, one, is very expensive to buy property, especially in this area, because it's highly desirable. I think we got, off the top of my head, it was like 0.1 there. It wasn't huge, but it was just enough to cover the cave entrance. And like I said, we're hoping to expand that this year because another parcel has come up for sale. So this is kind of the final piece that will really give ultimate protection for this colony.
Perfect. Mike had a question asking, are bats on neighboring Caribbean islands, Cuba, Santo Domingo, PRVI, etc., in a similarly endangered status?
Yep, that's the short answer. I mean, in different, if you want to go onto the IUCN Red List, there you can actually filter out by bat species and by islands. That will give you the best idea. But ultimately, yeah, cave bats and especially island species in caves are especially susceptible to that. And we're actually working with collaborators in some of these other Caribbean islands to think about long-term solutions. So we're hopefully going to be developing something in Puerto Rico, for example. We've got, we're actually prospecting at the moment for Dominican Republic. We've got collaborators working in Cuba already. So we're working on this and trying to make a wider conservation plan. But again, it's tricky because there are just so many species in the world that are in real threat. It's for us, it's where we can make the biggest impact, or where in other countries they already have partnerships in place and we can just kind of coordinate what we're doing.
Got it. Another question from Mike. What's the intended purpose of the development in that area of Jamaica?
For Stony Hill Cave, holiday homes is the primary reason. But caves are being lost throughout the island due to, yeah, agricultural intensification, building further roads, just urban sprawl. That It varies depending where you go, but for Stony Hill, it's very much holiday homes. It's in a really desirable part of the island.
Bettina, going back to the issue on feral cats, had a question. Was it considered an option to work with local cat or animal groups to have them trap and neuter and feed them so that predation decreases?
Yes. Feral cats on Jamaica, there's just so many of them. And it's not just bats they're an issue for. I know for many other of the endemic species, they're just not used to having invasive species like that. So part of the problem is there's just too many of them, and Jamaica is just such a large mountainous area. It's kind of just whack-a-mole, really. So for specific sites like the caves that we're trying to protect, doing the predator-proof fencing is the most cost-efficient and long-term solution, because that way, I mean, we can just build it with cats in. It doesn't matter, because the cats will go out. And Pacific Rim Conservation have done many studies on this, just looking at if you can find a cat within an area, especially around sort of mating time, it's just going to leave. It's just going to go off into a wider area. But it just means they can't get back in. So it may not be the quickest solution, but it's the best long-term solution we have.
God, makes a lot of sense. Well, Quincy asked if there were published papers on this project, and if so, can we provide links to them?
Not at the moment. So we're still actively working on this right now, but as we start to kind of tick off all our goals for this project, we're going to start to write case studies and also publish a few papers from it as well.
Exciting. Mike has a question asking, how expensive is LiDAR scanning equipment?
Very. Well, for me it is anyway. So we work with our subtraining team who have this as part of their day-to-day activities, because I think the base price of one of these units now is about $40,000 plus all the post-processing time and skill that's involved in it. And this is where working with BCI is great, because I can tap into our subtraining department and they can come in on special projects like this. Otherwise, us as a program, it's just too expensive to run.
Yeah, and that teamwork. And Bradley has a question. Who do you work with for eDNA work?
Multiple people is the answer to that. So for the waterborne eDNA, we're working with a UK-based company called Nature Metrics. For the work we're doing with the airborne stuff, we're actually helping co-supervising a PhD student from the UK, from the University of West of England, who's going to be really helping us with that. There's also another research group in Toronto that's working on that, Beth Clare, and there's also the Species from Feces group at NAU that also works on this. So we've been pioneering eDNA for a while. For our agave restoration project, we've been looking at how we can sample the nectar from agave plants to determine if bats have been in. So there are many different forms of eDNA. So it depends which group has that skill set. I also have a molecular background, so occasionally I'll just go in the lab and do it myself.
Piggybacking on that one, is eDNA a fairly new technology?
It's been around for a while, but the sensitivity has got to the point now where it's got a lot better, so it's now being used by more people, and the price has really come down as well. Usually there's a more expensive upfront cost in developing the primers, their techniques, but then once you've got that all sort of figured out, then for I don't know for the Jamaica work off the top of my head, but I know for the agave work we're doing in sampling the flowers, I think we've got it down to about $40 per sample we can do. So I mean, it still mounts up, but it's a lot cheaper than it used to be.
A question from Olivia. Is there a reason why cats leave the wings behind when preying on bats?
They're lazy. There's just not enough meat on them. Also, I have to say that the cats, from all the filming that we've done of it, while the cats will occasionally eat the bats, a lot of the times they're just playing with them. They're just catching them just for something to do, and then the mongoose are just hoovering anything up. So yeah, that's my best guess anyway.
From Laura Ann, what implications have you found with regard to the fencing used, for example, the flight path? Is this a sustainable approach?
Yeah, so this is one of our concerns. I was not involved, thankfully, but I inadvertently came involved with a project where some display boards were being put in outside a bat cave. And it was pretty shocking because you were there and you could just hear as the bats were hitting the back of the display boards. So one thing we wanted to make sure is that if we're going to put a fence up, it's not going to impact the bats and they're just going to fly straight into the fence. I mean, bats have an amazing echolocation. So it's not they can't see these objects, but bats will often commute a bit like us. If you're going to work every day and I ask you to recall a specific time from your morning drive, you wouldn't be able to do it because the brain kind of allows you to go on autopilot in a way, and bats are exactly the same. So realistically, what you're doing is you're getting the bats who are just coasting, seeing the thing at the last minute and are trying to avoid and just hitting it. And that's actually how mist nets and heart traps work as well. So one thing we want to do, and the photo I actually showed you, was the temporary fencing we put up. So we tried to put it up as far back from the cave entrance as possible, to make sure we gave the bats enough area to get sort of higher up. And there were two real flight mechanisms for the bats that are used in this cave. You've got the bats with the long, thin wings that fly very fast that aren't as maneuverable. And what we found is that they go up out of the cave and then they try and get quite high up, away from the trees, and they actually dip down into the river valley and just go off. So by putting the fence enough way back, we're actually missing their flight path completely. The smaller bats that kind of almost flutter like butterflies, because they fly a lot slower and they're not going as intentionally quick, they were coming up to the fence and going, oh, okay, and then just moving around it. And again, because we're giving it enough distance, we're giving them enough time to sort that out as well. So from all the video footage we did before, and I'll be doing more when I get back to Jamaica in a couple of weeks, we haven't seen this impact the bats at all. But it's one of the things that made me very nervous when we were planning this, which is why we took a lot of steps to make sure we weren't going to become a new problem for them.
I got it. So a few more questions, quite a few more, but can't answer all of them, unfortunately. But from Chris, so what happens after the feral cats are excluded from their food source, which you have discussed? Is it sometimes food, sometimes toys? Is there an appropriate section of the plan so that there are no negative consequences for the environment?
I mean, the cats will are finding food regardless. And like I said, a lot of the time they're actually just killing these bats just for sheer entertainment value. The thing that will be happening is just the cat numbers will just be going up and up and up, just because you are providing a constant food source for them. One thing that this will, I mean, they're feral cats as well. So, I mean, this is kind of the ebb and flow of food availability. As the food source starts to sort of be cut off from them, they'll just be having less, they just won't have as many successful breeding. So the numbers will just go back down to the level realistically they should be. I mean, they're feral and they're invasive species, so they shouldn't be there in the first place, but there's no way you can get rid of them. But what we can do is reduce them to the point where they're not as much of a threat to the environment.
Is there any issue with so those are feral, they they don't belong to anyone, but is there an issue with the currently domestic cats being let out and creating an issue in the environment?
I mean, yeah, whether they're feral cats or if there's developed sort of areas close enough to caves, domestic cats can also be an issue. And this is why I shy away from trying to catch cats, because it's a very sensitive topic and it's something I don't particularly want to get embroiled in. But by doing these predator-proof fences, it's a win-win, because the bats don't have the disturbance from the cats, and the cats just physically can't get in. So you're just excluding them from one small area and not creating any issues. And it's widely supported by the communities in which we're working in as well.
Oh, good. Yeah. Wonderful. From Abigail, could eDNA be used to detect/study the Jamaican funnel-eared bat?
That's the dream. That's what I'm hoping for. We haven't got the results back yet, but we're desperately hoping that's how we're going to pick it up.
So exciting. So some good questions here. From Jen Hopkins. How much is the cost for a fence?
Depends on the size and depends on the location. Yeah, that's probably the best answer I can give, because in some areas, if it's right next to a main road, depending on the suppliers, which island you're in, it fluctuates wildly. For Sinclair, for example, we have to have a trek it's a good 40-minute trek across some pretty heavy hills. So obviously that influences just trying to get the materials there, the water, the sand, the cement. It's just yeah, it's very variable, and we're extremely lucky with the contractor we're working with. They're extremely good in actually even wanting to work at these sites, which is another thing. Pacific Rim Conservation, they often have to airlift their supplies in by helicopter just because they're working in such remote places. So it's very varied depending on where you're working.
Got it. So let's see if maybe two last questions here. What other predators to the bats were caught on camera? Was it just cats or?
Well, we never recorded mongoose actually attacking bats. There has been evidence, not from our work, but rats can potentially climb up the walls and get some of the lower species as well. So the fence we're doing is predator proof. I mean, I talk about cats a lot, but it will stop cats, rats, mongoose, anything really going in to attack the bats. So it's going to capture all of those.
Okay, and we'll have this one as our last question from Quincy. Is it possible to adopt this project and its model in other Caribbean islands? And if so, how can they get started?
I think reach out to me. I mean, we are more than happy to share all the work we're doing and how we're doing it. Yeah, if there's a problem that you have and need some advice, I'm more than happy, and anyone from my team can talk about it as well.
I think that's the main body of our questions there. So thank you so much again, Jon. It's been fascinating. I think going off all of the comments everyone had, they also found it equally fascinating. I know so much more now about Jamaica's threatened caves and the bats. And thank you to the audience for joining us. Sounds like you had a great time. If you'd like to learn more about our efforts in Jamaica and any of our other programs, you can visit our website at batcon.org. That's BATCON.org. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe to our mailing list and newsletter. We're also going to have this specific recording available on YouTube shortly. So you can find our channel there. It's Bat Conservation International, and you'll be able to see past webinars and recordings as well. So that is all for now. I hope everyone loves bats even more than they did an hour ago. I certainly do. And we'll see you at the next Bat Chat.
Thanks, everyone.